Trump may have thought that his opponents would fight back, but it's the smaller friends who are quietly leaving that are surprising him. As things stand, several countries are updating their travel warnings to the U.S. because of the Trump administration's ongoing crackdown on immigration and the recent news that the U.S. is thinking about updating its travel ban on 43 countries. You can see the signs if you look. Factory shifts with no workers and contracts that were canceled overnight. According to stock charts, Canada's new trade partnerships are quietly changing the rules of the game, making America's biggest companies weak all of a sudden. This is not an article about policy, it's the start of a storm that could destroy whole towns. People who work on farms, in trucks, or in other jobs that involve crossing borders are in a tough spot. We thought the system couldn't be shaken, but it is. One question that no one has answered yet is how close the fall is. Seventh, the retail empire was watching as its northern country fell apart. The first rock to fall is America's biggest store. Along the border with Canada, you can walk through Walmart's huge storage centers. Warehouses that go on forever, looking like industrial towns. Conveyor systems that could move enough goods to feed a whole population in a single day. Loading docks where trucks wait in line like steel dominoes to bring American goods to markets in Canada that always seem to open. Walmart used this cross-border infrastructure to build a huge store empire that changed the way people shop in North America. 47 distribution centers that are designed to work best with Canadian delivery lines. There are 18,000 people whose jobs depend on getting American goods across that invisible line between the two countries. Canadians make $3.8 billion a year. That's not pocket change every 3 months. That's the difference between growth and corporate stagnation for a business that is already having to fight Amazon's digital dominance and changing customer habits that put traditional retail models at risk in every market. But Canada's new deals with 11 other countries are about to completely change the way stores work. South Korean companies that make goods can now ship directly to stores in Canada without going through American distribution networks first. Japanese consumer goods don't go through Walmart's warehouses at all because shipping lines across the Pacific are so much faster. Australian crops don't go through American processing plants or shipping systems. Instead, they go straight to shelves in Canada. Walmart's competitive edge, close location, and well-established facilities are all going away like steam in the winter air. Internal papers that were leaked to trade publications paint a scary picture for shareholders who read quarterly reports. According to early estimates that assume a slow start to the partnership, the Canadian market penetration went down by 34%. As building utilization rates drop, consolidation of distribution centers is being looked at as an emergency. Workforce transition plans are being made for sites in the north that might not be able to keep running if they don't make enough money. This isn't business theory about how the market might change in the future. This is happening right now as Walmart execs think about what will happen to decades of infrastructure investments if they become useless overnight as Canada's partnerships grow. The story is told in real time and with brutal mathematical accuracy by the stock's fluctuations. Every day, the value goes up and down by 7 to 9% as buyers desperately try to figure it out. Of a big store on the continent that could lose access to a third of the continent in 18 months, analysts on Wall Street talk about big reorganization possibilities that could change the way stores are located in the United States. But here's the deeper cut that keeps Walmart officials up at night staring at spreadsheets that don't make sense. When you build a whole supply chain ecosystem around one important relationship, and that relationship breaks down because of things you can't control, you lose more than just income streams that can be found somewhere else. You lose the tools that bring in those streams of income. How do you make 47 shipping centers work for markets you weren't ready for? How do you teach 18,000 people new skills for supply lines that don't exist yet and might not exist in the future? The math is harsh because it is so simple. For every Canadian contract that Walmart loses, problems start to spread through its full American retail network. Like slow-moving dominoes, suppliers whose goods were only meant to be shipped to Canada must now find new customers or shut down. Some trucking businesses that specialized in cross-border logistics are losing their routes. Small towns in the United States that grew up around Walmart distribution hubs now watch as their biggest employer plans how to leave. This is just the start of the end of shopping in America. But if the biggest store in the US is losing market share in Canada, just think about what's happening to companies that built their whole production plans around being able to get their goods to the north. Number 6, General Motors, the huge automaker that has to deal with traffic across the whole country. When retail fails, industry does too. Detroit used to be a word that people all over the world heard. There were assembly lines roaring with industrial music and workers rushing through the plant gates like rivers of American determination. The beating heart of American manufacture. Ring, making cars that took over global markets and set the standard for greatness in the auto industry. General Motors lived up to that tradition with strength and accuracy. Their parts are in cars all over North America, like DNA being woven into the lifeblood of cars. Canadian auto companies depend on GM's carefully designed parts in the same way that clocks depend on springs that never break. $2.1 billion in car sales every year in Canada, 23 factories that are especially set up to meet the needs of Canadians. Just-in-time delivery across the line between two economies that work together is made possible by supply chains that are set up to the hour. Just picture those production lines stopping as if they were running out of fuel. South Korea and Japan are two of Canada's new partners. These two countries make car parts with the same level of accuracy that GM is known for, but often at lower costs. And now, with special trade rights that American companies no longer have access to because of old agreements, the math is very hard because it is so specific to cars. Canadian automakers can now get brake systems from South Korea for 17% less than they would pay from American suppliers. Parts for engines coming from Japan can get to their destinations faster than parts made by General Motors, which have to go through slower, more expensive routes that take weeks longer to deliver. But here's the deeper cut that puts GM's whole continental plan at risk. General Motors didn't just build plants to sell cars in Canada. Their whole North American production strategy is based on integrated manufacturing networks. For example, parts made in Michigan are sent to Ontario to be put together in a special way, and then the finished car systems are sent back to the US. Integration, which has been the key to decades of successful car production in continental Europe, is about to become GM's biggest problem. South Korean companies that make parts are already seriously asking Canadian sites about joint ventures that would get rid of all American suppliers. Within the auto industry, there is talk of the Great Reshuffling, a major reorganization that could cut General Motors off from their biggest integrated production partner. Public statements of confidence were based on internal GM strategy papers that show the company was in a panic. There is a full emergency review of Canada's facility integration plans going on right now. Planning for supply chain alternatives sped up to the level of urgency needed for a crisis. However, the effects go far beyond GM's business walls and into the heart of American automotive communities. When GM loses contracts with Canadian automakers, the effects are felt all the way back through its supply chain like earthquake waves. Pennsylvania steel suppliers are seeing a drop in orders as Canadian factories move production to Asian partners. Ohio companies that make rubber are planning to close factories because tire contracts are going to providers in the Pacific. Electronics companies in Texas are losing their biggest contracts with car companies to other relationship networks. Last month, GM's CEO called a board meeting out of the blue. One thing was on the agenda, a plan for how to respond strategically to problems in the Canadian market. Analysts of stocks say it's really an existential problem posed as a trade dispute that could completely change how cars are made in the United States. In the American car industry's heartland, where GM has major production facilities, mall towns are watching their biggest employer figure out if it makes financial sense to keep running when their main integrated partner is choosing different suppliers. What will happen to the companies that power America's energy grid if the big three automakers lose their hold on continental integration? Fifth, ExxonMobil, the huge oil company that is losing its lifeline to the continent. Manufacturing is slowing down, but America's energy infrastructure is starting to take off. Oil derricks stand out against the endless sky like symbols of the country's energy freedom. Refineries that cover a lot of land, like industrial towns that never sleep. Pipelines that run across countries carry the liquid energy that keeps modern society running and determines the strength of a country's military. For decades, energy independence has been a political rallying cry in the United States. However, ExxonMobil built its continental kingdom in a way that was different and more profitable. Canada and the United States shared energy needs that seem to last as long as natural formations. Through integrated energy networks, ExxonMobil's businesses in Canada bring in $4.2 billion every year. Their pipeline systems move oil from Canada to refineries in the United States in a way that has changed the way continental energy operations are done. Their processing plants take natural gas from Canada and turn it into goods that heat homes and power businesses in the middle of the United States. It looked like the ideal European marriage where both partners relied on each other. Canada had a lot of energy supplies. America set up modern refinery facilities and distribution networks that connected products to markets around the world. The people in that marriage are asking for divorce, and the settlement could wipe out American energy strategies. Norway is one of Canada's new partners. Norway is a competitor to Canada in terms of energy exports and technological innovation. The UK is another partner. The UK offers advanced energy technologies and alternative delivery networks that don't use American infrastructure at all. But the big surprise comes from a direction that energy experts did not see coming. Canadians can get something from Australian energy companies that EXO and Mobil never thought of: true teamwork instead of relying on others to get resources. American energy companies took resources from Canada to process them in American plants. Now, the energy giant had a competitive edge because of Canada's stable supply, which made sure they could always get to resources. Their refineries can't compete with plants that have secured alternative supply lines through the new partnership agreements because they don't have guaranteed access to Canadian energy resources. Since Canada's joint news went public, stock prices have dropped 21%. Analysts of the energy market say it's the start of regional energy market fragmentation, which could change the way North American energy economics work in the future. The CEO put out a statement that tried to show trust. We are still optimistic about the chances of forming long-term partnerships with all of our continental friends. People who work in the company read the business communication very differently. They see desperation masked as diplomatic optimism, while the company tries to find other options. The effects are felt in American energy communities as well as business boardrooms. As Canadian crude sources run out, Texas refinery workers may have to be let go. Maintenance teams for pipelines all over the Midwest are seeing their main source of income go to other places. Small towns that grew up around energy processing plants are seeing their economies shift toward agreements that don't include the United States. As energy partnerships fall apart, the farming bases that feed both countries are facing their own existential problem. The fourth company is Cargill, a huge name in agriculture, seeing harvest earnings go away. Food security is affected when energy supply lines break down. There are endless fields of grain that go on and on until they reach the sky, looking like golden seas of American plenty. Big combines are cutting through wheat fields while the sky above is a big dome of prairie heaven. American rural communities were built with grain elevators that stood tall over small towns like steel cathedrals dedicated to agricultural success. This is the picture that made Americans the world's leaders in agriculture. Cargill built a continental empire by moving that harvest north through supply lines that worked like the weather does every season. Through Cargill's distribution networks, Canada buys $2.8 billion worth of American farm goods every year. As you can see, there is a river of agricultural wealth moving across the border between two countries, but their food systems are linked. Through smart investments in infrastructure, Cargill manages 31% of that agriculture flow. Their grain terminals are spread out along the border with Canada, looking like strongholds of American farming power. Their processing plants make American crops into foods that Canadian families rely on every day for nutrition and safety. But Canada's new partnerships are about to turn that river of crops into a drought that could destroy farming towns in the United States. Australia and Brazil are two agricultural superpowers that can produce as much as the United States. Now, their products have easier access to Canadian markets thanks to partnership agreements that give them priority over American goods. Because of better trade terms, Australian wheat can now enter the Canadian market at a 16% lower price than American grain. For some reason, Brazilian soybeans can be processed faster than American goods, which have to wait weeks to get through old, inefficient routes. This is where the agricultural dominoes really start to fall faster across farming areas in the United States. Cargill's infrastructure depends on consistent output, which means that they expect Canadian demand to be stable. For grain mills to stay profitable, they need a steady flow of grain. Processing plants need steady amounts of supplies to keep running efficiently, which is why they exist. When other suppliers make Canada's demand drop, the whole system starts to fall apart in the middle of the American agricultural heartland. Burying farming are seeing the prices of commodities drop as their biggest market looks for suppliers on other countries. In small towns that rely on processing agricultural products, the biggest employers are figuring out if their facilities can still make money now that demand in Canada is falling. In its quarterly report, Cargill hid a terrible prediction in business speak meant to keep investors from freaking out. Volume to be expected. If Canadian markets shrink, northern border companies may need to combine facilities and make the best use of their workers. Analysts in the business world call it the new agricultural depression. It's not because of bad weather or crop diseases, but because of political and economic droughts that shut down traditional markets. But the human cost is much higher than what data on agriculture can show in business reports. Agricultural workers who spent their whole lives learning how to meet the needs of the Canadian market are now finding that their skills aren't useful in their own country's markets. When salespeople make business connections across borders, their client lists become useless overnight as those connections move to other countries. In a world where continental integration is falling apart, engineers who build agricultural systems that work with other systems on the continents find their knowledge useless. The effects spread like dominoes across the heartland of the United States, affecting farming towns. Manufacturers of equipment that specialized in making machines that met Canadian standards are losing their contracts. Companies that helped with cross-border logistics for agriculture are seeing their main routes vanish. Small banks that lent money to farms based on predictions about the Canadian market are now facing loan defaults, as farms lose their main source of income. While farming fails, America's GUI infrastructure is at risk of losing its digital link to its northern neighbor. Third, Microsoft, a huge name in technology, is losing its digital highway. Digital networks are also at risk of losing their connections as physical supply lines break down. Silicon Valleys shine in the endless sunshine like symbols of American technology dominance. Server farms are busy with the digital heartbeat of business around the world that never stops. American technological innovation has made it possible for fiber optic cables to carry conversations across countries at the speed of light. Microsoft's dominance across the continent is based on a basic concept as old as physics. Data moves like water, always looking for the fastest way to get from one digital place to another. For 20 years, that road went through American networks, which were made possible by Microsoft. Through integrated systems, Microsoft's data operations in Canada handle 1.4 billion activities every day,